So I mentioned biotic versus abiotic factors in the vocab video if you watch that, but if you didn't, I just wanted to do just a little more on this for standalone. All right, so biotic factors, I already said, have to do with living organisms, right? So the number of species that are around, which species are around, things like that. But usually when we're talking about biotic factors that would influence the population size of different species, you're going to be looking at things like the food competition for food or food availability, right? That's going to sorry, or the competition for it. All right, and so this can be competition from within the species or from other species that may want to eat the same thing. All right, it can be the availability of the habitat. Goodness, I cannot spell this word. Or nesting sites or places to rear your young or appropriate places to lay eggs, things like that. And again, this would be kind of it could also be the competition for this. It could be predation, right? So maybe if you think about different animals that are often preyed upon, like rabbits, right? The idea of whether their population size in an area could just not be dependent on how much food they have available, but also are there things there that are going to eat them? So maybe they don't hang out in the field all day long because they're going to get eaten. And so instead you find them in the woods. Food availability may be scarcer, but the predation is much lower. So it's that type of thing, all right? Disease, remember the pathogens and things like that. If there's diseases around, that could influence the size of a population. If we're talking about plants, it could be the presence of insects, right? If we're talking about pollination and things like that that have to happen, it could be about the presence of insects. And it could also be about parasites. Presence of parasites can decrease the size of a population as well, right? So these are all different biotic factors that you have to take into account that could affect the size of a population. And by affect, I do mean affect either increase or decrease, right? Abiotic factors, I already listed several of these in the other. You could have climate, which would be things like light, availability, or intensity, and that could mean things like perhaps on the floor of some forests there's very low light availability, or it could mean that if you look at the poles, right, if you live near the poles, then for months at a time it's light, or for months at a time it's mostly dark. So light, this could also be temperature, water, right? You think about a very arid climate like the desert versus something like a rainforest where it rains every day, that's going to be different. And soil conditions, so that can be nutrients, pH, anything like that. That can influence what can grow there, what can be there. Also water content of it. Definitely the pollution that's present, if there is any, and if so, how much and what type of pollution, that could affect it. And then the other thing would be, it depends on the individual thing. So for example, if you're talking about a river or a pond, then one of the things that could be an abiotic would be the oxygen availability. Now, oxygen availability, if you're talking about, say, I don't know, anything that's not in water, so an ecosystem that's a desert or on a mountain or something like that, it's air, right? So oxygen availability isn't really going to be an issue. So this would be for a water environment or a water ecosystem, could be a big thing. Could be salinity, if you're looking at how brackish the water. So brackish waters are waters that are kind of mixed somewhere between salt water for example, in the ocean versus fresh water in rivers and lakes. So salinity would, in the brackish water, you could have different salinities. Or if you think about the Dead Sea, for example, it has a very high salinity content. It's saltier than water, so that would be something else. So these are all different things. Now, it's impossible, and the idea is that given the ecosystem, so the likelihood is that you will be given an ecosystem, and you have to think about which of these factors are going to be relevant and which ones are going to heavily influence the populations or the community that is there.